Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is that you are. My name is Sofia Gruskin, and I direct the USC Institute on Inequalities and Global Health at the University of Southern California. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's dialogue, a conversation between IIGH Policy Director Jonathan Cohen and Anand Grover on how we can achieve the highest attainable standard of health even in the face of democratic recession. I'm very excited about this event for a number of reasons. Well, first is the person. Our wonderful speaker, Anand Grover, who lives and works in India, kindly agreed to have this conversation on his speaking tour throughout the Northeast of the United States. He's a long-term friend and colleague and an inspiration to so many of us here in the United States, in India, and truly around the world. We're incredibly thankful for the conversation and really looking forward to his reflections and what he has to say in the current moment about the future of health and human rights. Now, on a related note, is the topic of this conversation. Jonathan and Anand will focus their conversation on India, the United States, and other democratic governments, and the state of the world to explore the many facets of the highest attainable standard of health that can be achieved even now and in this very complicated time. And third, I can't help but share my excitement as to where this event is taking place. Y'all aren't quite sure about that, right? So they are at USC's new Capitol campus in DuPont Circle. And it's such a wonderful opportunity for us to use this space for the sort of important policy dialogues that are meant to take place there. As the lead of our IIG work in Washington, D.C., it's more than fitting, therefore, that our first DC-based event with Jonathan moderating the conversation is happening there. And it is one of the first visible steps in how IIGH is engaging on the DC campus. And we're very much looking forward to developing this work as we go forward. Okay, just to share with all of you, Anand Grover. He is a designated senior advocate practicing in the Supreme Court of India, the director of the HIV/AIDS unit of the Lawyers Collective in India, the former United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health. He is brilliant. In his regular practice, he has argued several landmark cases in the field of public interest in human rights law that have mattered really, truly to all of us, not only in India, but beyond, including mass eviction cases, environmental cases, and cases for the rights of LGBT people. He's also done incredibly innovative work in the field of patent law, opposing the grant of patents for essential life-saving drugs, and successfully argued the first constitutional challenge to Section 3D of the Indian Patents Acts, and successfully defended against a challenge to the compulsory license issued for the manufacture of a kidney cancer drug. And during his time as the UN Special Rap, he focused reports on promoting non-discrimination, empowering vulnerable groups, and ensuring meaningful participation of affected communities in their own health in ways that were not only groundbreaking, but having long-lasting effects. We've been in the same sphere of global health, rights, and law for many years, and I really couldn't be happier, Anand, to have you with us at this event. And with that, I want to turn it over to our fabulous moderator for today's event, Professor Jonathan Cohen. As our Institute's Director of Policy Engagement, he does many things, and he's done many things. And importantly for today, he's leading all of our work in Washington, D.C. And with that, Jonathan, please, over to you for an exciting conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sophia. Anand, welcome to Washington.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you very much, Sophia, for those commending words. It's difficult. It's really an honor to be the first guest at this lovely campus. I wish you well. I wish you a great road up to a great institute actually leading in global health. I'm associated with a lot of them, so I really want to congratulate you and wish you the best.
Thank you. Thank you. And just so honored to have you here. Anand, so many people watching today, I think, know you for your global reputation, your work at the UN, including as Special Rapporteur on the right to health, as Sophia said. But you are, in many ways, first and foremost, an Indian constitutional lawyer, and human rights begin at home. And I'm wondering in that spirit whether you can begin by sharing with our audience a little bit about the Indian Constitution.
I think it's
peculiarities.
yeah, Jonathan,
Yeah.
that's a good question. I think it's very apt at this time when things are really looking bad for human rights. Yesterday, after the talk at Georgetown, my students, one of them asked, how can we believe in human rights when things are so bad around the world, especially the Israel-Gaza conflict? And I had to actually inculcate a spirit of belief, which I think is very important. But just coming back to India, India, the constitution was actually accepted by the people and given to the people by themselves after a huge conflict, as you know, partition of India, where millions of people died. There was religious conflict. And in that context, and there was the conflict across the world, the so-called socialist, communist world, and the capitalist world. And we had to, our nationalist leaders had to frame a constitution, which actually, the soul of it is actually in the preamble. The liberty, equality, fraternity principle is very much, and more importantly, pluralism and fraternity. Pluralism in religious sense, ethnic sense, gender, everything. So that justice, economic, social, and political fraternity is the ground-breaking thing that is very important in the Indian Constitution. And today, fraternity amongst human beings, to allow people to actually do their own religious practices, profess their religion, etc., is so important, but still live in a fraternal atmosphere. That's so important. And that is the essence and the soul of the Indian Constitution. But just to give a very brief overview, unlike the US Constitution, where you have the originalist thinkers, our Constitution, all judges have held that it's transformative in nature. So you adapt to the reality. So we won't have a Dobbs type of decision in the US. But there are other problems. There are amendments that can be made, and there's been a problem. And early on, the Supreme Court actually said, no, there are certain things you can't amend. Equality, fraternity, freedom of speech, due process, you can't amend them. These are things which are entrenched now. But more importantly, because we went through an emergency where fundamental rights were suspended. So again, there was a change. And after Mrs. Gandhi declared the emergency, she actually held an election. She saw her own mistake. She held an election, she lost, and the new government which came in actually amended the constitution so that fundamental rights cannot be suspended. So that was an important landmark. There are other things that are going on now. Another issue is that because we have the transformative nature of the constitution, or our courts have interpreted it to be so. What we see is that civil and political rights, like the due process clause, and in India it's reflected in Article 21 of the Constitution, which says no person shall be deprived of their liberty or life without procedure established by law. A negative covenant has been interpreted on the ground and basis of dignity to confer positive rights. So that is the beauty of the Constitution, which can be interpreted. Not that everything has been good. I can tell you the things are not so good today. But the courts have used that to interpret positive rights also, like the right to food, right to environment, right to health, especially. So that's been the journey, as it were.
Fascinating to learn that it was the experience of a state of emergency and the suspension of rights that led to the jurisprudence, if you will, that fundamental rights cannot be suspended going forward. Also incredibly fascinating, particularly for members of the audience that come from countries like the US, where the Constitution has not been interpreted to include positive rights, to hear that that's the case in India.
Yeah. This was a case of an Irish woman prisoner. And she actually wanted newspapers to be delivered to her. And the reaction of a jail authority is always, how can you have these things? Because you're behind bars. You're not entitled to liberties. So the Supreme Court actually had already held that only because you cross the barrier of a jail wall doesn't mean your rights are suspended. And more importantly, what they said was that the fundamental underpinning underlying basis of all fundamental rights or human rights is the dignity of human beings. And if dignity is the core of that underlying basis, then what is the meaning of dignity? It also means all those elements which are required to have a dignified life. Not only a negative right or a negative injunction against the state that liberty cannot be deprived without procedure established by law, which is the due process clause, but also for sustenance of the dignified life, you need food, you need environmental, etc., etc. So in that way, they actually converted a purely negative injunction or interdict against the state into a positive right. So the right to health is not explicitly found in the Indian Constitution, but it has been interpreted to be so. So that's fascinating. And this also tells you that the classical separation between the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and civil and political rights, the division is artificial. And they are actually intertwined and interlinked. This is very, very important to understand that human rights are not separate in that sense. They are actually interrelated, they're intertwined. So to have this artificial separation and then go on to say at international law that civil and political rights are in fact enforceable directly and economic social rights only progressively realizable is not the correct notion according to me.
Right. You've started to anticipate my next question, which will be of particular interest to this audience. So how have these two major developments, the inability to suspend fundamental rights, as well as the reading of positive rights into the Constitution, how have they affected the right to health in particular?
Well, the right to health has actually been read into the constitutional provision of Article 21. Earlier on, our courts did not actually see the value of the general comment. Though our jurisprudence, in fact, our constitution is based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it borrowed from the US Constitution, it borrowed from the Irish Constitution. It's an amalgam, but it's got its own internal consistency. So earlier on, they did not interpret the right to health in consonance with Article 12 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, or with General Comment 14. But of late, and one of the case I argued, I pressed this forward. So now the right to health is seen in those terms. But still the judges are hesitant, saying that because they think that is progressively realizable. So they're not enforcing it the way that we want. But in terms of life-saving medicines, they're very clear. So we have been able to push that forward. And it's actually now moving forward. Like, for example, HIV medicines, the courts are very clear. The governments have to provide. And we have free ARVs for all people living with HIV. Similarly, other medicines are also being made available through court orders.
So why certain things and not others? What's the court's reasoning?
Well, you know, this is the famous thing that's also happened in Brazil, because those who are articulate and able to push their point of view forward, they are able to access the court and push their view and get what they want. Like, for example, people living with HIV can get ARV medicines or ARV treatment, but people with spinal muscular dystrophy, whose medicines are very expensive, they've not been able to achieve that. Though now we have been able to push the government to the courts to negotiate lower prices. In fact, that case is going on right now. So we hope to do that, and it's based on the right to health.
Any other highlights of jurisprudence that affect human health over the last 70 years that you'd like to highlight for us?
No, I think the most important thing is that the courts have now seen that these are vital issues. But at the same time, there is a pushback by the government. As you know, we have a government from 2014 which has its own views on the Constitution. They, in my opinion, with due respect to them, they don't believe in a secular constitution. They believe in a constitution which is more or less Hindutva, promoting Hinduism. Now, as a result of that, there's been pushback on a number of things. For example, on secularism. The government institutions are being used for religious purposes, which is unheard of. The parliament inauguration is through a Hindu festival, that kind of thing. Now, that's not, according to me, correct in terms of a secular constitution and a secular state. But also pushbacks on things like the medicines which are available. Though I must add that now there's a national plan for delivering of health care for poor people, which is a progressive thing. But at the same time, unlike the past, where prices of medicines, which actually account for 50% of healthcare costs, there's not much attention being put to that. And as a result, what is happening is the prices of medicines are going up, though we have a law which actually controls the prices of medicines, depending on which medicine it is. The government has the right to actually fix prices of medicines, but it's very difficult because the pharmaceutical lobby is very strong. Secondly, the quality of medicines has become an issue in India because they have changed the law, as a result of which, after 4 years, the first time a pharmaceutical product enters the Indian market, it's subject to certain regulatory procedures at the national level. After 4 years, it's no longer what is called a new drug, and the state level drug control authorities are allowed to approve that without the rigor at the first time. So as a result of that, there has been lack of attention to the quality of the drugs that are coming in, which has become an issue internationally. And I hope we can sort it out quickly, because India is the largest producer of generic drugs, which actually also contributes to the affordable medicines. If we are not able to get that right, we will lose out and the world will lose out.
I'm sure you're aware, we're here in Washington, D.C., that the issue of the price of prescription drugs is very high on the policy agenda here in the United States and in Washington. Recently, our Congress passed legislation that for the first time authorizes the Secretary of Health and Human Services to negotiate with the pharmaceutical industry the price of certain classes of drugs offered through our national Medicare program, which is healthcare for seniors. Even that was controversial. There are, as you may know from your legal colleagues, multiple lawsuits brought by the pharmaceutical industry against the US government, who don't believe that they should even be allowed to negotiate the price of those drugs. What should American health lawyers, constitutional lawyers learn from the Indian experience?
No, I think the most important thing is not the jurisprudence alone, but to have a public healthcare system which actually functions for the whole of the population. You don't have to go to jurisprudence in this context, because if you look at Europe, most of it has national health services, which is abhorrent in the US. But that is the only way, and especially for developing countries, they have to have national health services, which makes Medicare medicines available at affordable rates or free of charge. The pharmaceutical companies don't lose out in the UK or in Europe. They make as much money, not as much as in, but there is this kind of notion in the US that if you nationalize things or the national health services, somehow it's not capitalism. It's very much capitalism. And certainly it's not communism, as is projected it to be. But what you have to do is you have to have very strong primary health care so that the load doesn't come on the tertiary care, and it has to be funded by public healthcare system. Unfortunately, the prescription, which has been advocated by the US, unfortunately, around the world, is to privatize, which actually drives the costs up very high. And you don't concentrate as a result of that, because there's not enough profits to be made at the primary healthcare. Then primary healthcare doesn't actually cater to the health needs of the population who are poor. And then it actually burdens the tertiary healthcare, which is not on. That's why in India, there's a major problem. Some of the states have introduced public healthcare, like Delhi, and it's working very well. Not only that, even in education, public education system now is producing better students compared to private, because you're actually taking care of the children's needs in education or healthcare.
2 inches forward so that the audience can see you. I want to remind the audience, first of all, thank you so much for being here for this conversation. There is a Q&A function. If you'd like to put some questions in, we'll do our best to incorporate them into the conversation. Anand, you began speaking a few moments ago about some of the threats to Indian constitutional law. Could you
Yes.
elaborate on that?
Well, this is a very serious challenge, not only for constitutional lawyers, but also for politicians and the polity at large and the public at large. There's a serious threat to the secular nature of the constitution by the present ruling dispensation. They want to make India into a Hindutva state. They're not happy with the secular state. As a result of that, there have been so many things, which is one of the most worrying things is the divisive nature of the polity today by the ruling establishment. So minorities are actually vilified. There've been lynching of Muslim populations which are not addressed. The media has become totally government oriented. And we've seen in the past also when the government is very strong, the courts become weak. So access to courts is not actually remedying that, despite the fact that we have a transformative constitution. Ultimately, if you have good laws and you have an excellent constitution, it's the persons who actually implement them, which is very important. Like, for example, as I was saying in the Israel-Gaza conflict, people are saying, what is happening to human rights? Ultimately, it is those persons who implement the international conventions. We see in the International Criminal Court, for instance, whereas in the Russian-Ukraine war, the public prosecutor jumped the next day. The public prosecutor sleeping for the last 1 month. And ordinary people in the US, including Jewish communities, are actually very worried about it. What is going to happen? So what I'm trying to say is that you should have the best principles and you should believe in them, because that's the only thing that actually allows humanity to exist as a mass of people with certain rules, that is human rights, and the covenants on economic, social, cultural, and civil and political rights, the UDHR, these are principles that we have to stick by. They should be enforceable. Don't give up on them. But you also have to check how people who are personnelling them are held to account. Because unless you have people who are actually able to implement them, you will not be able to succeed. But you don't give up on human rights. That's very important, I think.
I do.
And that's why India today, the issue is, sorry, I interrupted there. They are not implementing the constitution as it should be. And in India, we have seen in the past, in the emergency, the court became very weak. We have a very strong government, but the courts have become weak. And they're not doing what they should do in terms of protecting the liberties of people today. So, for example, all NGOs today who are foreign funded, their licenses are cancelled. They are a very important part of a system, of a democratic pluralist system. Opposition parties find themselves and their leaders in jail because on specious plea of corruption or money laundering, which are being misused, and the courts are not acting on that. And just before the elections, large number of people have been arrested. Also, civil society activists have been arrested. So, and the media is completely towards the government. There's no real independent media except social media. And the courts are actually pleading helplessness, as it were. So we are in a very difficult situation. I think India will never become what is happening in Israel today, where there is no rights for Palestinians. But in order to safeguard, we have to fight back. And every living society goes through this, pushback on democratic rights. We have seen this in the US. You had the Trump kind of administration, and look at what happened to the US Supreme Court. After the judges swore at the Senate that they actually believe in Roe versus Wade, they completely changed in the Dobbs decision. So the courts are also politicized now, all over the world. Nothing exceptional about India. There is politicization of courts all over the world, which is a very dangerous trend.
I do hope that our audience will derive some hope from hearing from someone like you who has worked on the front lines of safeguarding constitutionalism in the face of democratic recession. I invite you, Anand, to go into even more detail about the democratic recession that you're seeing.
Well, you see, actually, in India, what's happened in the last 8-9 years after the new government came. First of all, they have a very clear agenda of Hindutva. So, whereas in our constitution, all religions have a right to practice, profess, and propagate their religion, you have a one-sided view now. So, those are encouraged, not others. On top of that, as I said, vilification of religious minorities. You've had lynching of Muslims, and the government has not acted. And in Manipur, we thought that it's only the Muslims are being vilified. No, even Christians are being vilified in Manipur. So it's not only one minority, all minorities. And the government is doing nothing. And the courts have pleaded helplessness, though they have issued directions here and there. All civil society activists who are prominent have actually cases, prosecutions against them. Opposition leaders have cases against them. The media is one-sided. So there is democratic recession going on, which needs to be addressed by the courts. Of course, elections will be held soon. There are state elections in 5 states in the next month. And hopefully things will turn around and there will be genuine opposition, which can ultimately the political issue also. But I think the fact that the courts are actually not able to address this is a very, very difficult and a dangerous trend.
So let's bring it back to health.
Yes.
You've talked about multiple manifestations of democratic recession, vilification of religious minorities, persecution and jailing of opposition figures, state capture of independent media. How ultimately do these trends affect health and public health?
Well, it also impacts when we talk of independent institutions. Normally, in the course of discourse on, in liberal constitutional run democratic countries, we only talk of the media as an independent institution. But actually, even the state institutions have to be independent because they advise the executive. For example, in COVID, take an example of COVID. It's a pandemic. Is the government going to take political decisions? They will be advised by independent scientific institutions. Now, that's what's happening all over the world, including Brazil, etc., where they did not take into account independent scientific views. That's what happened in India. So, even, for example, sinking of the Himalayas, there are cities in India which are sinking. News is blacked out. In a place called Joshimat, where practically a town is sinking. You're not allowed to get news about it. So institutions which are supposed to actually give out news so that people can make independent decisions, that news is not allowed to come out in the open. So that also impacts health. Census has not been carried out. Every year, every 10 years, we have census carried out in India. Census has not been carried out this decade. Now, census is very important to take decisions. Statistical institutes' findings are not made available. So there are very big issues which are very important. And everything in health is based on data. And you can't get data. It's not easy to get data. Information is not available, though we have the right to Information Act. Every decision on health is to be based on scientific data. If we don't have that data properly available, then how are you going to make decisions? So this is also the aspect of democratic recession, which impacts not only health, a series of other measures, which I think is very serious.
So thank you. We have a couple questions from the audience, if
sure,
I may.
sure,
I'm going to read them. The first one is, you made a claim early on that when the government gets stronger, the courts get weaker. Could you unpack that a bit? This person is acknowledging that courts are technically a branch of the government. So how is it that a stronger government means weaker courts? Just explain that.
Yeah, very clear. No. Like in the United States, there is the doctrine of separation of powers.
Right.
So Parliament or the legislative wing actually enacts laws, the executive implements it, and the courts are independent of these institutions. The parliament and executive are subject to judicial review. So the courts are independent. They're part of the government. They are part of the state, but they are independent. Now, during the emergency in 75, 77, they suspended fundamental rights. And there's a judgment of the Supreme Court saying that even if you're killed, the courts can do nothing about it. But they had a diamond bright hope that it wouldn't happen. So at that time, Mrs. Gandhi was very strong and the court was weak, Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Today, it's the same thing. The government is very strong, which is a good thing. I think the government should be strong, but the courts need not be weak.
Okay.
And the reason why the courts are weak is also due to the fact the way judges are selected to superior courts. Though we have a system in India where selection of judges is done by judges, the ultimate authority which appoints them is the executive. Now, the executive has been able to delay appointments of certain judges who are seen to be not in their favor. As a result, it's possible for the executive to get those people appointed who are to their liking, which actually makes the court weaker.
Thank you. Well, and thank you for the question, and thanks for explaining that for us. Another question from the audience. We have an audience member who does not agree with your contention.
I'm very happy.
that secularism is under threat. This audience member feels that there is a genuine debate about that in India and asks, can you give us some examples or evidence of secularism being under threat?
Well, if the parliament is inaugurated through a Hindu festival, you're actually insipidly destroying the secular nature of the state institution. I don't think there's a genuine debate at all, because the whole of the media, which is the mainstream media, is actually one-sided. And I'm glad the learned member of the audience differs with me, but I'd like to differ with her or him or the transgender person, whoever it is. But I think it's good to debate and actually look at it. If you look at the evidence today, all the mainstream channels are pro-government. That's the unfortunate thing. And in fact, those journalists within those channels who are not predisposed toward the government have been eased out. You can make your guess who's easing them out. I don't have to say it.
Okay. Let me ask you a follow-up question, and we have a couple other audience questions that I'll come back to, but I was very interested in the examples you gave earlier about the impact of democratic recession on health and public health. You gave the example of whether independent government scientists are able to work independently, whether their advice and information is reaching the public. This has been an issue in COVID. It's been an issue in climate change. For the Americans in the audience, I take it that what you mean by that is that it would be as though an agency like the U.S. Centers for Disease Control was not able to act independently or to get their advice out to the public because of political suppression. Is that what you're saying?
Something to that effect. If CDC is not independently to put out information in the United States about a particular drug. And of course, there's a genuine dispute going on whether CDC has actually correctly approved certain drugs during the COVID scenario. That's a different issue. But I think the more important issue is that undermining the independence of scientific institutions is very, very important. I don't think that it's completely undermined. There's a trend towards it. And I think that's serious. And I think the government should take note. It is for their own, it is for the benefit of the government that scientific institutions and every institutions, now take the election commission. You know, in Kashmir elections, Kashmir was divided and made into municipalities. There's not been an election there for years. Whose job is to decide that elections should be held? Election commission should take up the issue. Nothing is happening because the election commission is said not to be independent on these issues.
Is there, I'll ask you to come into the screen just so we can see you, thanks. Is there a particular litigation or court cases or advocacy campaigns on this issue of independence of institutions?
No, there are not, because a lot of people, and you know, one of the leading lawyers in India, constitutional lawyer, Mr. Kapil Sibal, is actually in number of interviews mentioned that, you know, he's is actually very disappointed with what's happening in the courts. Now, this is not me talking. I'm a nobody compared to Mr. Sibal, who's one of the leading lawyers of Indian constitutional law. Not only that, academics, Indian academics or in American universities have actually said that the purpose of this vilification of minorities, especially Muslims, is to make Muslims into second-class citizens. I'm not saying it. This is actually said by others. So I'm actually reporting to you what others have said, who are actually well known in their particular field. I'm just a lawyer. I can only talk about the law. I don't claim to make any political statements at all.
Let's go to another audience question.
Yes.
And I'm going to read this verbatim. Fascinating question from our mutual friend, Danielle Tarantola.
Oh my God.
Danielle, welcome.
Welcome indeed.
Wonderful, Anand. He says, the issues you raised in the context of India, the largest democracy in the world, are or should be of similar or even greater concern to all other democracies. Do you foresee global health and human rights principles, norms, and standards becoming a strong focus of the future interest and commitments of the nascent, unified Global South agendas?
Welcome, Daniel. I'm glad you asked this question. I think it depends on us, global rights advocates, who actually make sure that these things actually become an agenda for the Global South. The Global South is not united. I think the issue is what should be the basic principles. Now, take, for instance, the blockade of Gaza. Food is not allowed to be delivered. Medicines are not allowed to be delivered. What are we doing about it? As a human rights community, do we think we have failed or do we think we have succeeded? Now, we should ask these questions, and this is being asked of me by a lot of students. And what I've been stressing is that the principles of human rights have to be preserved and actually propounded and promoted. But people who are in charge of implementing those principles, whether they be governments or bureaucracies, have to be held to account. And I don't think it's a South principle or a South issue. It's now become an international issue. And I think today the very preservation of human rights is under threat. This is a very historic moment that if we don't want to be distressed, in fact, one of my very close friends is very disturbed by what is happening, and she's actually of Jewish origin, and she's very depressed. And she says, can we believe in human rights anymore? If those are not the principles that we are going to live by, what are we going to do? So I actually emphasize to her that we have to believe in these principles. Even if you are religious or not religious, you have to believe in these principles. These are the only ones which are civilized to unite the human race. But you have to actually make people who are implementing them, including international institutions like the International Criminal Court or other courts, hold them to account and make sure that they hear your voice.
I'm glad you brought it back to this, and another of our colleagues, Kavita Munjal, has asked a similar question. We hear you loud and clear that we have to remain hopeful. We have to not lose hope. But let me press you, really, how?
Well,
how do we remain
I think
at a time like this?
Yeah, in a time like this, you have to fight back, fight for your principles. A person holding demonstrations, there were more than 250,000 people demonstrating in Washington on Saturday. I passed the demonstration and I met a lot of people, Jewish people, Palestinians, etc. And they were asking me, is this going to have an impact? It is going to have an impact. President Biden and other officials of the government should know that a large number of young people are actually saying to them, it cannot be in their name. They should hear them.
Yeah.
And that is what you have to do. You have to fight back in a democratic, civilized manner. You have to write about it. You have to say that we don't agree with it. You have to demonstrate. You have to make your voice heard. And never lose hope. I will emphasize that, never lose hope. And that is the only way to go forward. In the Second World War, when the Jewish people were subject to a Holocaust, if they had no hope, they would not have been able to fight back. The fact they fought back was because they had hope. And that it's nothing to do with any group, it's to do with the general principle that we live by. And it is for everybody. Everybody will only be able to live in a fraternal manner, in a humane and dignified manner, if we actually preserve those principles, which are excellent. I mean, actually, I thought back about this, and Mrs. Roosevelt, who actually framed the UDHR, I have to really thank her for what she did. I never realized the import of her contribution till this moment, I mean, in the last month. I think it's very important to realize that she contributed significantly for us to be able to have these principles. And these principles have to be not only be respected, but protected and promoted.
And indeed, out of the Holocaust came the Universal Declaration.
Absolutely. And they should be promoted.
If I were a Palestinian in Gaza, I might be asking myself, and I'm going to ask you, what has the Universal Declaration and the human rights framework done for Muslim minorities in India? How has it helped them?
No. See, the Universal Declaration of Rights is the springboard for our constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Our constitution protects every religious minority. And I think even the government sees it, and it is up to those people who believe in it within government and outside government. I have not lost hope of any government. I think all governments are held to account. Within the government, there are people also who are very serious about these issues. But as individuals who are non-governmental, we have to press forward and make our voice heard in a fraternal, democratic, and peaceful manner. I have hope that you can change people.
But are you seeing religious minorities in India successfully use human rights arguments and frameworks to advance?
Well, there are cases coming. It's a dynamic process.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you can have a straight answer.
Okay.
Things go up and down historically. So I have hope in the long term. I think things will, even if they're bad at particular point of time, they become better after some time. And it's up to us. We cannot just hope. We have to be active. We have to be active and make our voice heard. So even in my own government, I have faith that they will listen to this point of view. If you lose hope in that, then you can't do anything. So why do we talk? Because we think that the government will listen to us. I go to court knowing full well that I have to be able to convince a judge. They may be of any particular bent of view. I don't mind that. But I have faith that even government listens. And they listen for various reasons, for whatever reason. But we have to make them listen to our point of view and discourse with them so that they change the point of view. That is the essence of a democratic process. There's no other way. Otherwise, if you lose faith in that, then you have to take the gun, which I don't think. I mean, let me be very honest. If you take the gun, how will you replace the constitution? How will you have a better document? Which is the principle of how civilized nations would actually function. So since we have a fairly 95% good constitution, we have to live by that and live in that society which goes by those rules. If the rules are broken, then you have to restore them. That's how I look at it.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
come to another issue that I think might challenge people's sense of hope, or at least remind them that progress is not linear. And that is the issue of same-sex marriage. The Indian Supreme Court recently ruled in a same-sex marriage case that there is no fundamental right to marry in India. That is a different direction than the US Supreme Court took in same-sex marriage litigation. Is that case a reflection of the same general trend we've been talking about today? And more broadly, how did you react to that ruling?
Well, you can't actually say that a particular case is a reflection of the trend. It's
Okay.
there is dissonance in that, but my reaction was very clear. This is a wrong judgment. Why? And I wrote about it in the Hindu and said that Indian constitution is actually based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, We are parties to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Both of them, Article 16 and Article 23, actually prescribe as human rights the right to found a family and marriage. And our jurisprudence is very clear. We interpret our constitution on the basis of international treaties. So there was no way they could have actually said that there's no right to marriage. On top of it, your judgment of the US Supreme Court overfell, where the right to marry judgment, they also say very clearly that there is a right to marry, and that's fundamental in society. The institution of marriage is fundamental in society, but it is being denied to persons who are not heterosexuals. And therefore, it violates the 14th Amendment. That was an argument. But the court took the view in argument, oral argument. No, ours is, there's no statute prohibiting that. Whereas in the US, there were statutes prohibiting, state statutes. But our argument was that if once you declare there is a fundamental right to marriage, then things follow. But they have actually not agreed with us without actually making us know that they didn't agree. So the judgment that has come is a bit of a surprise. But like you said, it's not linear progress. When we first decriminalized same-sex relations in the High Court of Delhi, they went to the Supreme Court, set it aside. So that was going back. That is in 11, 12, 13. That is 11th of December 2013. Setting aside the 2009 judgment of the Delhi High Court, which then was restored in 2018. So there are ups and downs. So now we are filing a review petitions. We will then fight it with the curative petition because the chances.
Anand, could you were muted for 1 second.
Yeah, I think it's very important to know that you are fighting for a just cause. In a just cause, because injustice has been meted out to you for centuries sometimes, or decades sometimes, like criminalization of same-sex relations in India by the British under the Indian Penal Code. It was 1.5 centuries it took for us to turn it back. Though India actually had understanding of not only binary relations, but the third nature or third sex. That was part of the culture. In fact, Indians didn't believe that we had a third culture, because they had been they were imbibed with the ideology of the British. So any injustice which has to be fought has to have a long-term aim, and you will face hurdles. You will fall, but to get up again and fight, which we did in the criminalization of same-sex relations. We have fallen again. We are getting up, and we will win.
It is. It's fascinating to listen to you talk about the relationship between international human rights norms and Indian constitutional law, which is a relationship that obviously the judges in this case seems to have ignored. I'm curious how you've seen that relationship evolve, and also, did your experience as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health influence the way you think about the connection between international human rights norms and domestic
Well, as
law?
I said earlier, these are principles evolved over a period of time, centuries.
Yeah.
And our constitution is actually practically based on the UDHR. It was so heavily influenced. So for me, it's natural to think that international covenants are part of our principles, They're not, there's no dissonance. Only, and the law has been very clear in India, if there is a contrary statute, only then the international covenants will not be applicable. Because all international covenants are subject to your constitutional principle. And the individual domestic law can be slightly different or different in a major way. If that is the case, then the international covenants will not apply. And our court has gone to the extent of saying that even if once we have signed and ratified the treaty, if there's an absence of law, then we can frame guidelines, like in the famous sexual harassment case. So in our country, the notion of international law being used to interpret it is very common. Unlike, say, the US or Australia, the US Supreme Court will not look at India. The Australian High Court will not look at India. But we look at everything. We look at Australia, we look at the US, we look at Britain, because knowledge and that's the saying of one of the judges, knowledge or light from anywhere is welcome.
Yeah. Thanks. Let's we're nearing the end. This has gone
a lot.
very quickly. Let's talk about the future. And I want to say that, as will not surprise you, we have folks in this audience who have a primarily legal background. We have folks with a medical and health and public health background. And of course, we have people like you and I who work at this intersection. What do you see as some of the emerging issues at the intersection of health and law?
I think there's now a danger that privatization in developing countries is going to have an adverse effect on the exercise of the right to health for a lot of people, because governments are now being pushed or cajoled or encouraged to privatize. In India, that's happening. Instead of actually having primary health infrastructure being strengthened through public measures, some of the states are doing it. There's increasing intervention at the tertiary level of private sector, which actually pushes up the cost of healthcare tremendously. And that's happening all over the world. And the road, which has been in a long fight, and that's been going on for some time, is to make sure that if you want to have the right to health being actually realized by the vast majority of the population in the world, especially the developing world, you need to have public health infrastructure at the primary level, which then doesn't burden the tertiary sector. Because the primary health infrastructure in India is very weak, people go to the tertiary sector for even primary ailments. That is not on. And that is destroying the health of people. This is apart from other issues like rapid development also leads to Delhi is one of the highest political cities in the world, Bombay and Delhi, because there is actual construction going on. We have to address those issues also. The government has to strike a balance. Develop at what cost? Because obviously development is very important. But development at the way it's going on today brings a lot of pollution, which impacts on the health of people. So many people, including me, actually are victims of respiratory problems because of the pollution. So there are a number of issues like that. They are common issues. The other common issues are pandemics. Just look at the way how the pharmaceutical industry behaved. They made the largest ever profits during the pandemic. And people in the developing world were not able to access vaccines. So in the first world, people were able to a large extent, access vaccines, thank God. But at what cost? One. And on the other hand, the developing world, they were not able to access. So the model which is being followed internationally has not worked. We have to think of new models which works. And my view was that the way of the TRIPS waiver was not correct, in my view. And we don't have time to discuss that, but in my view, that was not the correct, because you're asking a body of people who actually depend on the pharmaceutical industry to waive off their profits. They're not going to waive them off. I mean, the multinationals anyway, the patent owners anyway make huge profits on blockbuster drugs. And I know the pricing, the way the prices are actually structured. But in the pandemic, it actually multiplied manifold. What are you doing? You're actually making, allowing the pharmaceutical industry to make huge profits and on the one hand, and not delivering vaccines to the people who need it in the developing world. That's inequitable. It's not correct. It's morally wrong. Things have to change.
So you mentioned publicly financed primary care.
I know that's a very difficult thing in the US. And that's why, unlike say Europe, there are large numbers of people in the US, huge percentage, who are not getting access to healthcare.
Tell me though, I mean, am I correct in saying that when you talk about publicly financed primary care, you're really calling for a return to the principles of the Alma Ata Declaration? Is that where you see? So that's where the future is for you?
In my opinion, the government funded, publicly funded primary health infrastructure is the most important way to move forward, which is actually being undermined today by including the US multinational companies, Indian multinational companies, every one of them. Because they're only looking at their profits, not about the health of the people.
So a couple follow-up questions on that, and we just have a couple more minutes, but where do you see room for hope in advancing publicly funded primary healthcare? You've talked a lot about
there are
challenges. Yeah,
yes.
where's the hope?
Well, as I said, a few of the governments now have started implementing. Even the government of India
Okay.
is implementing a publicly funded program, Ayushman Bharat. State level, they are doing it. So I see there is a future, but there has to be debate on this issue because this is being done willy-nilly without proper debate. Because the right to health of people in a country like India, it's very important. I think there should be debate which way we are going. That debate has not taken place and things are moving willy-nilly without proper planning. But the government fortunately has instituted a publicly funded national program which is reaching quite a lot of people, and I think that's a good thing.
And then my next follow-up question is, will the issue of access to publicly funded primary care, will that be fought in the courts at all? What are
No, that has to be, the courts can only rectify a few things. It has to be a policy decision, it has to be a political decision, and that is best left to the governments. It can't be done at the courts level. Courts can only tinker with some of the policies here and there. They don't have the wherewithal to actually decide these issues as an institution. And they don't have the wherewithal with the inputs that are required. Otherwise, it'll be like in Brazil, for example, a person can go to court and ask for a particular medicine. So depending on who's powerful, who can access courts, they get medicines, but not the people who really need it. So that's been a critique of a number of people who disagree with that system of the court-based access to healthcare. That can tinker with it, but it cannot. You have to have overall program which is based on inputs, needs of the people over a period of time, of decades. Which actually what the National Health Service did in the 40s in England. That was replicated all over Europe. Fortunately, 99% of the people in Europe get healthcare. But what about US, which is the primary example of private healthcare? Huge percentage of people are not getting basic healthcare.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much. This has been an incredible conversation.
Thank you very
much. Real
much.
gift. In the last couple minutes, do you want to share with everyone any final thoughts or how you're going to be spending your time in the United States?
Well, this was a wonderful conversation. I don't claim to be right on every point or on each of the points. I think it's very important to debate. People who disagree with me are welcome to disagree. I'll be spending my time to talk to my faculties wherever I go. I'm doing a lot of teaching and also interacting with faculty and students at different diverse universities. So I claim that I would be learning from other people, like I learned today also. Even the discussion we had, I think it's a learning process. I always encourage discussion. I always tell all my students, please disagree with me. That's the best way of trying to resolve a problem, which we consider a problem, and actually go forward with a mutually agreed road to better healthcare services and a better world for all.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, look, this is exactly the kind of dynamic, learning, robust dialogue that we seek to hold on our new campus here in Washington. Thanks for being our
I hope I'll be invited again, Jonathan.
You will certainly be invited back. I want to thank everyone on behalf of IIGH's Director Sofia Gruskin for coming. I want to announce our next event, which is our IIGH 2023 Student Symposium, which is on November 16th. Please take a note of that. And please follow our website and our social media accounts for additional information about our many events on inequalities and global health. Thank you all very, very much on behalf of all of our colleagues.
I'm wishing you the best for the future of this campus.
Thank you.